Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for being here. I'm Heather Gatney, and I'm the coordinator of the CVFS webinar series. I'm joined here today by the director of the Chitwan Valley Family Study, Bill Axon, and Stephanie Shardul, the director of survey research operations at ISR. They're going to present on the Composite International Diagnostic interview that was recently fielded in Nepal. We'll have time for a Q&A after their remarks. We ask that you remain muted until then. During the Q&A, you may unmute and ask your questions, or you can submit a question at any time using the chat feature. We'd also like to remind you that this webinar is being recorded. If you have any objections, you may disconnect at this point. A recording of this webinar and the slides will soon be available on the CVFS website. And if you missed our first webinar, which was an introduction to the CVFS, you can now view the slides and the video on the website. And with that, I will hand the meeting over to Bill.
Thanks so much, Heather. Welcome, everybody. Steph, you're in charge of the slides. And I think I'm going to save a couple contextual comments until we get in a little bit. To give you a sense of what we're trying to accomplish today, it's heavily on the methodology of trying to do good work measuring mental health and the use of life history calendars to improve that. We're going to talk about survey research on mental health in general. Then we're going to talk about retrospective reporting and the use of life history calendars to improve that. Next, we'll talk about a large-scale experiment we conducted in Nepal. And finally, we'll close with some discussion that will touch on both the methodological takeaways and the substantive opportunities with these new data. So I'll open by commenting on our overall goals in adding mental health research into the Chitwan Valley Family Study. And as many of you know, Nepal experienced about 8 years of medium intensity armed conflict, which Chitwan was exposed to for about 6 of those years. And throughout that period, I think Dirga and I became increasingly concerned, so Dirga Gamiri is with us too, increasingly concerned about the mental health consequences of that long-term exposure to armed conflict. Coincided with my role as director of the Survey Research Center and greater exposure to the Survey Research Center's international data collection capabilities and activities. And I wanted to give a thank you to Beth Ellen Pennell, who invited Dirga and I to join the World Mental Health Consortium meetings to learn more about it. To Ron Kessler, who invited us and welcomed us in and taught us a bunch of this stuff. And I'll comment on a couple other notable folks. I feel like Dirga Gamiri, Stephanie Shardul, and I sort of ran with this, but we were enabled by a little village of people around this, Kessler and Pennell, first of all, among them. One reason they embraced the idea is even while we were working on the topic, this major earthquake occurred. A lot of people around world mental health saw the Chitwan Valley Family Study as an opportunity to expand the study of predictors of variation and change in mental health by using our panel data on communities, households, and families to study mental health change over time. We also met a psychiatric geneticist named Jordan Smoller, who was visiting the consortium from his normal role at Harvard. And he was describing the tremendous advances in psychiatric genetics in the understanding of genetic predisposition to psychiatric disorders and the ability to measure those at the large scale with studies of saliva-based DNA. And so it became an extra important opportunity for us to take advantage of the CVFS whole family design that we described 2 weeks ago to be able to study intergenerational, spousal, and genetic influences on changes over time in mental health. And this really special opportunity with mother, father, child genetics to understand the genetics of nature versus nurture, which if Professor Smoller has explained it to me correctly, lies essentially in, do kids suffer because their parents passed on their genetic disposition to disorders, or do kids just suffer because parental disorders change the way parents behave in ways that affect the children's environments? Anyway, putting all those various things together was our motivation to do all of this work. Stephanie, all yours.
Thanks. So for this study, we modified and adapted and used the Composite International Diagnostic Interview, or CIDI, CIDI. And the CIDI was the data collection tool used for the World Mental Health Consortium that Bill just mentioned, that we joined for the Nepal project. As it says here, over 35 countries have participated to date in the consortium. And there are new countries even now. We started in 1999. In 2000, there are new countries joining now. Some recent countries, just so you can see the diversity of data collection, include the Philippines, Qatar, Turkey, Norway, South Korea, Hong Kong. And I just attended a meeting yesterday to launch a new study that we'll be doing in Puerto Rico. So all of these countries used the CIDI as a standardized instrument. And the CIDI is special because it can be administered by lay interviewers, and it generates valid diagnoses across many different mental health disorders. So even though the interviewers are not mental health professionals, they complete a rigorous training and certification process. And at the time we launched the Nepal study, the CIDI mapped to DSM-4 diagnostic criteria. It has since been updated to DSM-5. So for the study in Nepal, obviously we needed to go through an extensive translation and cultural adaptation process. And though individuals in Nepal speak dozens of exclusive languages, we translated only to Nepali, and that's how all of the interviews were administered. The CIDI had performed well in European and other Western countries, but it had not been so successful in Asian or African settings. We have more experience now, but at the time we started work on the Nepal CIDI, we knew that we had to approach it very carefully. So we put a lot of effort into review by local mental health professionals and did multiple rounds of cognitive interviewing and revisions. I'll show you a reference in a minute, a couple of references that describe that whole process. We completed a pilot study, and as part of that pilot, we successfully validated the subset of disorders that we were using. And just to be clear, for the Nepal study, we used just a small portion of the full CIDI interview so that we really could focus on the quality of adaptation for that handful of diagnostic sections. And unique to this study, as part of the cultural adaptation, we modified some of the standard time items in the CIDI questionnaire to account for Nepal-specific cultural practices of describing time. So this is both when we ask respondents about elapsed time of episodes or symptoms, and also thinking back into the past. We really had to carefully modify some of those standard items in the CIDI. So here are some references. The first one is our basic CIDI reference. If you want to learn more about the CIDI instrument, the version that was created for the World Mental Health Consortium study. And then the next two references describe this process we went through to create the Nepal-specific CIDI.
Thanks, Steph. Now I'll describe a bit about our use of life history calendars. I'm going to do that by first describing the general limitations on retrospective reporting of all kinds of stuff. Then I'll discuss briefly retrospective reports of mental health and just how bad those are. And then we'll talk about life history calendar and why it's helpful in this situation. So retrospective reporting is always a challenge. It's cognitively challenging to recall precise timing of life events. Just test me on birthdays. In fact, somebody asked me my son's birthday this morning. I got the month and day right like that because we celebrate that every year. Took me a minute on the year. I'm happy to report I got it correct. And that's pretty good. That's my own kid's birthday. Anything else, tougher. And that might be just me. In fact, we'll show you some results. It is tougher on men sometimes than women, so forth. But in general, recall of the precise timing. Did it happen this year or that year? When in the year? Those sorts of things are difficult for people. And in general, recall of more memorable events helps people recall less memorable events. And this means that you can use timing of some events to help people do a better job of timing of other events in their own lives. And finally, traumatic events can be particularly difficult to remember correctly. It's not at all my area of specialty in science. I just had the opportunity to see some other presentations about the brain science of recalling traumatic experience. And it does turn out that people's memory is affected by their reaction, their brain's biological reaction to the stress of trauma. And so depending on the traumatic experience itself, it can mess with people's ability to get time ordering of events and timing of events correctly. Steph, go ahead to the next slide. So turns out retrospective reports of mental health, or if I may, mental disorder episodes are particularly tough for folks. In general, only the most severe or enduring disorders are reported at all, let alone correctly. And all the normal rules apply. That is, younger people do better remembering stuff that happened in their lives than older people and so forth. But panel data, and there's a study from New Zealand that is particularly devoted to interviewing 1,000 people every year, no matter where they are and all that stuff. And that panel data demonstrates that retrospectively, only about half of disorders are actually reported. And so it's definitely a big concern for studies across the age range that you're going to get differential reporting because it's worse at older ages. But for all studies, that retrospective reports are going to somehow be biased in the omission of less severe experiences or just completely forgotten experiences. Longitudinal studies, prospective collection is the best method for sure, but it's expensive, that expensiveness eliminates it for a lot of large-scale population studies anywhere, and certainly international comparative studies as well, to be able to do expensive panel studies over and over again about mental health. Which brings us to life history calendars. And my next slide here goes over some of the literature about life history calendars. Our colleague Arlen Thornton, responsible for a lot of this literature, working with Deborah Friedman on that first paper, which used a life history calendar embedded within a panel study to demonstrate that the life history calendar improved reporting of the kind of events I was describing, birthdays, marriage anniversaries, those kind of things, with school enrollment, so forth. Robert Belly's work on the autobiographical memory in human beings and how the event history calendar helps people do a better job reporting stuff. And then Caspi, Moffat, and who really focused in on psychiatric research and the advantages of the calendar for both research and actually for clinical intake as well. So that's the science background of life history calendars. We have, of course, as many of you know, a bunch of life history calendar experience in Nepal, starting with our first one back in the late 90s that was part of the original baseline of the Chitwan Valley Family Study that we talked about 2 weeks ago. And then Lisa and I integrated that into our overall picture of mixed methods. And you could read more about Nepal-specific history calendars there if you wish. Next slide. I think we must be to the calendar itself. Stephanie, all yours. Notice I backed out when it got hard.
So this is a picture of the calendar we used in Nepal, and it's a fairly typical format where the columns represent time units and the rows across are various domains or events for the respondent. And though the CIDI questionnaire was administered to respondents by the interviewers using computer-assisted interviewing, so they were using their laptop computers and an automated questionnaire application, we kept the calendar as a paper format printed on these huge oversized pieces of paper that the interviewers would use in conjunction with the computer-assisted interview application. Oops. So this is just a picture, a closer up view of the calendar. So the top row of this is just one corner. The top row is the Nepalese calendar years, and it's a 60-year span. So it represents, kind of the oldest age of the respondents that we were interviewing. And the timing of important national events that occurred at the same time for everyone in Nepal is on the next row. And the interviewer would take the time to, kind of read through each of those with the respondent. And these included things like the first election, rollout of a new education system, major earthquakes, the Royal Palace massacre. So these national events that everybody would be familiar with. And then each calendar was pre-edited, customized with highly memorable local neighborhood events. And these were things like the start of local bus service, the launch of a youth club, the opening of specific hotels or schools, the start of ambulance service. So again, the interviewer would have these kind of pre-written on each respondent's calendar and would review those with the respondent. Then the interviewer spent up to 15 minutes with each respondent, collecting and recording important personal experiences that the respondent identified. And these could be things like a residential history, a marital and childbearing history, a history of the respondent's own educational and job change events. So those were all recorded on the calendar. Then the interviewer turned back to their laptop and the CIDI questionnaire and started administering the screening section of the CIDI, which contains, 1 or 2 STEM questions for each of the disorders that we ask about. And the respondent is answering those STEM questions with all of these memorable events fresh in their mind. As soon as they screened positively for a disorder, the interviewer would return back to the calendar and record on the calendar the respondent's age at first symptoms, duration of significant episodes, etc. And during the questionnaire itself, whenever the respondent had trouble remembering their own age at specific key points, the interviewer would turn back to the calendar and use it as a tool to probe the respondent for accurate information. So these are just some pictures of interviewers using the CIDI and the life history calendar in Nepal. Interviewers are often outside on the ground with respondents, and you see they have their laptop for the CIDI administration, and then this large oversized paper calendar that they are kind of continually using as a tool during the course of the interview.
So we used the calendar and the CIDI to conduct a very large experiment in Nepal. We're going to describe to you the experimental design, the results for mental disorders, and then the results for potentially traumatic experiences. The experimental design focuses on 50 out of the CVFS 150 neighborhoods. In those 50, we did a neighborhood level random assignment so that 25 of the neighborhoods received an integrated life history calendar plus CIDI, where respondents were interviewed using a life history calendar first and then asked the CIDI, and then a matched 25 neighborhoods where they received only the CIDI. And when I say matched, many of you who know the details here, we literally used odd numbers and even numbers on the neighborhood IDs, which means in all clusters, they're literally matched. Nevertheless, the neighborhoods have different population sizes. So we have 1,089 individuals aged 15 to 59 who were interviewed with the life history calendar, and 1,404 who were not interviewed with a life history calendar. So it's an unequal comparison at the individual level. Our analyses that we'll show you focus on the 4 most prevalent disorders: major depressive disorder, or MDD, generalized anxiety disorder, or GAD, alcohol use disorder, or AUD, and post-traumatic stress disorder, or PTSD. And by the way, we made sure to include these because clinicians in Nepal had reported to us during the translation and adaptation process that these were the most prevalent seen in clinic, but they also turn out to be the most prevalent in survey data. The structure of the CIDI itself drives the way we will show you the results. And the structure is there's a screening for key symptoms first, and only if a respondent screens positive for that disorder are they then asked detailed diagnostic assessments. And for me, as a sociologist who's been around survey data on, like, do you feel sad for decades, a key difference with this CIDI is that it includes a whole bunch of behavioral measures about the extent to which your sad feelings interrupted your day-to-day behaviors and the length of time that those impairments lasted. And those are really key to getting you to a symptom threshold that would meet diagnostic criteria for having what a psychologist or psychiatrist would call a disorder, where a psychologist might call it a mental disorder and a psychiatrist might call it a psychiatric disorder, but they mean MDD, GAD, AUD, or PTSD. All right.
So,
yeah.
Yep. So as Bill mentioned, the individuals were randomly assigned by neighborhood to the treatment groups. And this shows that the demographics of the 2 groups did not differ significantly, especially on age and gender. But there were some differences on ethnicity. So you can see there slightly different proportions across the multiple ethnic groups. And there also was some difference in education, where a slightly higher proportion of respondents who received the life history calendar met our education threshold, which is a school leaving certificate, SLC, which is equivalent to passing the 10th grade in Nepal. So we did have that possible effect of the life history calendar respondents having a slightly higher education level.
Okay, now we're going to show you some results for the mental disorders. And with this first table, again, the top portion focuses on the screening rates. The second panel focuses on lifetime diagnosis according to DSM-4. And the last panel focuses on 12-month diagnosis according to DSM-4. So I'll start with the screening. Left-hand side are cases without a life history calendar. Right-hand side are cases with a life history calendar. First row is depression, and you'll see that 10% more report depression screening symptoms with a calendar than without. You'll see also a significant increase in generalized anxiety disorder symptoms, though not as large. You will see no increase in symptoms of alcohol use disorder, and you'll see another statistically significant increase in screening positive for post-traumatic stress disorder. And what's so interesting for those of us who are family demographers, not mental health experts, is that the things used in screening are very different here. Depression does rely on your memory of how long a bunch of symptoms lasted. And so does generalized anxiety disorder. Alcohol use disorder depends upon knowing how many drinks you had and stuff like that, which is a different kind of memory process for recall. And post-traumatic stress disorder screening is exposure to a potentially traumatic experience. We'll show you more on that in a few minutes. In the meantime, if you look at the next panel, lifetime diagnoses, you'll see an enormous increase in the fraction of our CVFS respondents who are diagnosing positive for major depressive disorder with a life history calendar as the context for their reporting of their symptoms. You'll see another really big increase for generalized anxiety disorder. You'll see no significant increase for alcohol use disorder, and you'll see, not as huge, but another big increase in diagnosing positive for post-traumatic stress disorder. Of course, lifetime experience is a lot more total experience than the last 12 months. But even here, for both depression and post-traumatic stress disorder, you see some significant increase with a life history calendar. And we're going to go on and show you more results. As Heather mentioned in the beginning, use a chat for your questions, or we'll have time. Don't worry, we'll have time for discussion after. But go ahead, Steph, and let's take a look. Now, the left-hand side, the rows are in the same order. But now we're looking at with and without among males, thanks, Steph, and then among females. So this is a gender difference. The very last column there is a statistical significance test on the interaction between gender and whether or not you have a life history calendar. And what you see very quickly is statistically significant gender interactions for all three of depression, generalized anxiety disorder, and post-traumatic stress disorder screening. But interesting differences nevertheless. There's a big increase in female screening. For males, it actually reduced screening positive for GAD, even though it increased for females. And for post-traumatic stress disorder, you see the big positive screening is among males. Looking at diagnoses, you see sort of the next level of reality for that same set of dynamics, where you see for diagnosis of depression, life history calendar improves reporting for both males and females. But the gender difference is quite significant. No difference for diagnoses for males, but a big significant difference for diagnoses of generalized anxiety disorder for females. Then an increase in reporting post-traumatic stress disorder for both females and males, for diagnosing positive for that for both females and males. But it's bigger. It's not a statistically significant gender interaction. It's big for both. Very similar set of results for the last 12-month diagnoses as well. Steph, you want to go ahead? We're going to look at age next, I believe. Yes. So on the left-hand side, we're looking at younger, age 30 or less. I guess it's trivially obvious which side of this I'm on. I'm not going to out anybody else. Well, dear guy, I always feel compelled to out you, but he and I are in the second group, greater than age 30, where you will see here, again, the last column is the statistical significance of the interaction between those two age groups and the calendar without. And you'll see here that life history calendar, as predicted, helps older people more, but it still helps younger people some, particularly on screening for depression and post-traumatic stress disorder, but also on diagnosis for depression and anxiety disorder, both. You get some improvement for young ages, not just at old ages, and a little bit of that in the 12-month. But this interesting thing about alcohol use disorder, that goes the other direction in the 12-month for the younger group. Steph, let's go ahead and take a look at our last one. Is by the school leaving certificate that we described before as our measure. Oh, sorry, I'm so sorry, I forgot about this important graph. So age is part of the story, and of course cohort is part of the story, and this takes a little bit of cohort look at percent screening positive for depression on the left, and percent diagnosing positive for depression on the right. And you'll see the oldest cohorts are at the top. Those of us who are demographers know this represents the greatest exposure to the risk of bad things happening, including depression. And you'll see that with the life history calendar gives this statistically significant boost, but a big total difference in those cohorts with and without the calendar. And also some boost in the younger groups, but not as big a total boost in the cohorts that are younger. Sorry, now let's go on to the education differences. So without a school leaving certificate on the left, with a school leaving certificate on the right, educational attainment by life history calendar, statistical significance in the final column. And so you'll see that even though without a school leaving certificate increases reporting with a life history calendar, so that left two columns, you see a bunch of statistically significant differences. The interaction between the two, not actually significant on screening. You'll see the interaction between the two is significant for diagnosing positive with depression, and this huge effect among those without a school leaving certificate diagnosing positive with depression, much more common with the life history calendar. Begs a little bit the question about a multivariate analysis, which we could talk about later, but of course some of this is related to the gender effect that we saw later, where females in those older cohorts are much less likely to have school leaving certificates than males. But you can see a similar pattern where that's really the only part where the interaction between education and the calendar is statistically significant, not so much on the rest. Okay.
So in addition to the general disorder prevalence rates, we also look carefully at specific events known to result in post-traumatic stress disorder and other types of adversity in people's lives. And these potentially traumatic events are things like experiencing a man-made or a natural disaster, such as the earthquake, being in a serious accident, having a loved one unexpectedly die, being in a war zone, which many respondents experience this conflict in Nepal, being a refugee, being physically beaten or assaulted, or witnessing other types of violence. As part of the CIDI, we ask respondents whether each of these events happened to them. And if so, we collect information on when it happened and how many different times it happened. And so for this section, which acts as the screening for PTSD, we are asking respondents to think back over their entire lifetime and identify which of these events have happened to them. Oops. So here we look at without the life history calendar and with the life history calendar, how many respondents reported any potentially traumatic events, how many respondents reported at least 2 potentially traumatic events, and 2 or more PTEs is particularly important threshold because it's associated with a significantly higher prevalence of mental disorders. And we also looked at the mean count of reported PTEs without and with the event history count, the life history calendar. And here we look at it by gender. The calendar has a larger impact on men when we're looking at these PTEs, where the calendar significantly increased the proportion with any PTE, with those at least 2 PTEs, and also the mean count of different PTEs that were reported. And we have written 2 different papers looking at potentially traumatic experiences and the calendar itself to improve the measurement of lifetime experience. So everything we've talked about today is included in these papers, and the one in psychological medicine, the second reference here, also presents results for the clinical validation that we did of the life history calendar CIDI, where we were able to show that the validation scores were similar to, or in some cases better than the validation of the US National Comorbidity Survey, which used the US English version of the CIDI. So to summarize, the randomized experiment with the LHC produced significantly higher reports of lifetime experience of mental disorder when used in conjunction with the CIDI, in particular, higher prevalence for major depressive disorder, generalized anxiety disorder, and PTSD. And we were able to demonstrate very good clinical validity, where we improved the detection of disorders, but still were able to show that the CIDI is conservative relative to the clinical instrument. So we were comfortable saying that we're not actually over-diagnosing disorders by introducing the calendar into the data collection process. So our interpretation is that completing the life history calendar improves the recall of mental disorder symptoms through their temporal association with key life events. So for example, in the depression section, the respondent needs to recall whether symptoms lasted most of the day, nearly every day, for the threshold of 2 weeks or longer. So this demands that the respondent recall both the beginning and the ending of the symptoms accurately enough to know that the spell covered 2 weeks or longer. With the life history calendar, there was a significantly higher rate of reporting symptoms that met the duration threshold compared to those without the life history calendar. So with the life history calendar, 71% of respondents met that duration threshold. Without, only 29% met the duration threshold. And as Bill alluded to earlier, alcohol use disorder acted a little bit differently, which makes sense because alcohol use disorder is dependent on more simple count measures. We're literally asking the respondent to count the number of alcoholic drinks they had during a certain time period, rather than recalling duration of episodes, which benefits more from the life history calendar. And the reason for the stronger effect on women is not entirely clear. In general, women tend to have better recall of disorders, but it's not clear if this is a function of better memory or greater willingness to engage in this memory search task. There may be gender differences in the motivational effect of the calendar, so that's something to look at. And it's also important to note that in Nepal, as I think Bill mentioned already, there is significant in being less well educated, particularly among our older respondents.
Yeah, so I'll just comment that in addition to life history calendar potential increasing reporting of potentially traumatic experiences, that increase in 2 or more potentially traumatic experiences is really big, 74% increase. And that's so important because 2 or more is such an important threshold for people then suffering from mental disorders after that second experience. I'm going to dwell for just a moment on a comment Stephanie made about clinical validation as my segue to some of our substantive results. And that's because this clinical validation step I didn't know much about, but it's so important for the understanding of what we've done from a psychiatric and psychological perspective. And I think very important for those of us planning to use the Chitwan Valley Family Study data for substantive purposes. That is our ability to clinically validate these measures at a level comparable to or exceeding what was done in the United States allows us to really get some authority in saying these are good measures of these disorders. They may not be a measure of every disorder there is, but of the disorders we've measured, we have very high quality measures. That's the basis for our first area of substantive contribution, which was our colleague Kate Scott from the World Mental Health Consortium led us in a paper on prevalence of the various disorders in these data and change in variation in that, and demonstrates that Nepal overall a bit more resilient than many richer settings. Interesting. Steph, the next slide, and it focuses on the substantive results related to marital experiences, which everybody here probably knows is a special interest of mine. Super interesting compared to rich countries like the United States, Western Europe, many other European diaspora countries where the CIDI has been done, where getting married either reduces your chances of getting depressed a lot, and especially if you're male, or has no effect, more likely if you're female. For women in Nepal, getting married actually significantly increases the odds of becoming clinically depressed. Interesting. And this more recent paper or subsequent paper to that, which goes into more depth, by the way, Journal of Affective Disorders, probably around 10 pages of text, whereas American Journal of Sociology is something like 40 or 50, right? So more depth. In that paper, we're able to show, in addition to that difference in the marital consequences on depression, interesting, intimate partner violence. Getting hit by your husband or wife turns out to be depressing to pretty much everybody, including people in Nepal. But super interesting in Nepal with very high rates of arranged marriage. And I harken back to Dirga's paper on sort of all the way to you had no say at all, that arranged. Turns out people who had a marriage that was that arranged, they had no say at all, much more likely to be depressed than other people. Interesting, and hoping that that makes its way to parents everywhere. Next slide, Steph, which focuses next one on some of our context measurements. In this one, another member of the World Mental Health Consortium, Karina Benjet, led us in an analysis that connected the armed conflict data that Natalie Williams worked a lot to create, and we've integrated into the data set, and showed that exposure to armed conflict and particularly beatings related to armed conflict during childhood had long-lasting consequences, increasing major depressive disorder after the armed conflict was over for kids who grew up during the armed conflict and had exposure to that at the neighborhood level. So, so that's a little taste of a little bit of substantive work, which I hope we get to talk about after I shut up. Before I shut up, archiving is underway at ICPSR, should be out by December. We're crossing our fingers, hoping sooner than that. If you want to know exactly when, do feel free to sign up for the CVFS newsletter, and that'll generate a notification to you. Release A includes our section A of the questionnaire, which has some demographic background in it about each respondent, then screening for disorders, and finally diagnosis, lifetime and 12-month of disorders, which relies on all the measures in the diagnostic algorithm created at Harvard by Kessler and colleagues. The code book for this data release is already available on the CVFS website. We gave you a little tour of the CVFS website 2 weeks ago at that webinar. You can follow that tour through and find this code book if you want to look at it. We're hoping that release B will be later in 2022 and have the more detailed individual items, some of the ones that Stephanie was describing, such as these length of time thresholds for various behavioral impairments, will be available for some of the diagnoses. We'll do that as quickly as we can. Is that all?
That's it.
Okay. That means we are open to your questions, and I will be quiet for a little while to see if anybody will ask us a question.
I have some questions. Can I go ahead?
Oh yeah. Go ahead.
So you can feel free to tell me to read the code book for some of these, but because I didn't realize it was already available. But I guess I'll ask kind of my questions going in a backwards order. So you showed these big differences for diagnoses between the group that had the life history calendar and the group that didn't. So do you have recommendations about, and maybe you're going to tell me to read your papers, recommendations about how to use these data going forward in analyses? I mean, is it enough to control for which arm of the experiment?
Let me stop you. No, we fixed it. It was two. Actually, Sarah, great question. Thank you for asking it. Yeah, this difference was very exciting from a methodological perspective and absolutely horrible from a substantive perspective, right? And so we literally, and one reason why the data release is not any earlier than now is we went back and redid all 1,000 of those interviews with a life history calendar to get it right and get it validated, so that all of our, we have, I'm not sure, I'll get the number right, I think it's 10,714 completed CIDI with life history calendar interviews from the Chitwan Valley Family Study ages 15 to 59 and 2016 to 2018. And so the release A with the diagnosis will give you screening and diagnoses for all those 10,714. We only got DNA from 10,308, and we probably didn't get quite all those genotyped because a little bit of the DNA wasn't great, but the DNA scored really well too. Coulter will tell you a little bit more about that on December 1st. But yeah, we did. It could have been horrible. We did, Sarah. We went back and got it fixed.
Okay. So you have 10,000 interviews. So that definitely then includes all original respondents and then anybody who was born or moved into the neighborhoods.
Within that age range of
Okay.
15 to 59. Yep.
Okay.
And Sarah, thanks Stephanie for making that 100% clear, because, you know, if you think about what she just said for a couple minutes, your stomach starts to turn. I'm sorry, I didn't understand just how bad this would be at the time. But of course, anybody who was, what, 40 years old in 1996 is 60 years old in 2016, was not eligible for this interview because our top end was 59. I'm sorry. And so on the plus side, the age pyramid in Nepal still looks like this, which means you're getting bigger and bigger younger cohorts coming in, which means actually the case base is larger than it would have been if it was original sample only. And we have a lot of young adults. I think we're going to talk in the spring about some of our new work on transition adulthood, which was really only possible because there are so many young adults, kind of 15 to 24 in this data set.
Can I ask one more short question before you get to the one in the chat? A question I get asked a lot is does the CVFS have subjective well-being measures? Would you respond yes now that you've done this? Or is this really, I don't know what people mean when they say that, but they ask me that all the time. So
yeah, interesting. I mean, I would love for you to respond saying, gosh, they've got the Composite International Diagnostic Interview Measure of Mental Disorders. Is that what you mean by subjective well-being? I personally, I mean, and Sarah, thanks for being here. I can't tell you how much I love that we did that paper on love. You know, demographers have been studying marriage for hundreds of years without studying love. Is that subjective well-being? We know that the measure has a lot of limitations. We've got these other marital quality. I think, you know, depending on how you're thinking about what's important about subjective well-being, there are pieces sprinkled here and there all over the Chitwan Valley Family Study, but you'd have to want that particular variety, I suppose.
okay, thank you.
More than you want to know. That's my tendency with questions. So we have a super interesting question in the chat, thank you, which is how did Nepal benefit from this study? And Gaurav, if I may, first of all, I do all this work hoping the benefits are not over the day that I'm giving a webinar telling you what the methodological input into the study was. I hope that this is a very important resource for us understanding Nepal, all of South Asia, perhaps all of psychiatric disorders worldwide. So the benefits are yet to accrue over the next 100 years, okay? That is truly my hope. We've been able to publish a few papers. I hope that has some indirect benefits. Dr. Gamiri, I'm giving you a few seconds to think about how you want to frame the answer to your answer to this question. It's a funny thing because we tell our respondents that their donation of their time and effort to answer our questions, and in this case, provide saliva so we can do DNA analyses, will not expected to generate any direct benefit to they themselves. So interesting. And I always thought that important because of my history and experience in Nepal, having been around so many human beings told this project's going to come and take care of you this way. That project's going to come and take care of you that way. And the next project will come and take care of you that way. We never made any claims that this project was going to come take care of people. We asked them to donate their time to participate in the study so that they had an opportunity to tell their story, and so that we had an opportunity to create better scientific data about the problems and issues they face. Dirga, would you like to add anything to this answer? I mean, certainly we're just getting started, is my opinion about this study.
Right. No, I think, yeah, you covered almost everything. And I am hoping this study will encourage other researchers in Nepal to do similar or study on mental health in other parts of Nepal. It's only done in one valley in Chitwan. So yeah, and people have already learned or have already in interaction with me about how to do a better mental health research in Nepal.
And in fact, Dirga, toward that goal, the Nepalese version of our questionnaire is available on the CVFS website. Anybody can go there, print it off, use it for their research. It's not held back in any way. Stephanie, I'm very curious about how Professor Kessler or others in the World Mental Health Consortium answer this question country by country, because I'm sure it comes up.
So first, I just want to say one other thing that I think is important for how this benefited Nepal, and that is that we helped build some capacity among professionals in Nepal. One example of that is our training of local psychiatrists on the clinical validation instrument, the CIDI, and working very closely with them and engaging them in the research plan. The second is we did as much work as we could with a local in Kathmandu lab that processed all 10,000, extracted the DNA from the saliva samples. We worked very collaboratively with that lab in Kathmandu to do that important step and keep that work in Nepal and help them build the capacity to do this extraction of human genetic material from the saliva. So in general, in the World Mental Health Consortium, their big focus really is publishing the prevalence rates and making sure that governments are aware of these and that they are then feeding into policy decisions, especially around the area of availability of mental health services. So looking at in Nepal, there's a huge disconnect, which we knew before we even started this study, between mental health services and the burden of mental health disorders in the population. But to be able to quantify that, even in a fairly local region, is extremely important and a first step in helping to build this public policy, this public health policy.
No, thank you, Stephanie. I think none of us will forget when Dirga first came to World Mental Health Consortium and showed a picture of a man with mental disorder in chains in his home because there was no treatment available. And I think that was certainly a big influence on Professor Kessler's devotion to trying to make this kind of work possible in a place like Nepal, to make sure the least served anywhere in the world also had their stories told. I'm going to keep my commitment to ending right at 3 o'clock. Everybody's counting on that. That leaves us about a minute and a half if anybody wants to try a quick question. I'll use my last minute to thank everybody so much for coming to these. I hope you'll join us again in 2 weeks. Dirga, I think you're speaking in 2 weeks, correct? No, it's Emily.
Emily, yeah.
Emily gets to talk about data linking, everyone's favorite topic. That's going to be so much fun. I'm supportive, Emily, but I'll stand in the background. Trust me on that one. Okay, great to see everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. We really, really appreciate it. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.